Pretty Dece, here we go. Facebook.com/Pretty Dece Show. It's time to geek out with Josh, your host.
It looks like Sony will be skipping E3 for 2019. And one has to wonder if that means it's going to be the beginning of the end for the long-running video game conference. What's up, everybody? I'm Josh Meek, the Uber Geek. Welcome to Pretty Dece. Thanks for tuning in. This is the daily entertainment and pop culture show. And E3, if you've never heard of it, you probably then aren't into video games, because it's kind of synonymous with video games. It's short for the Electronic Entertainment Expo. And it is a yearly video game conference where all of the big video game companies historically have come together to make their biggest announcements of the year. 2019 will be the 25th year of E3. It's been running since 1995. And the show has evolved a lot over the years. So for the longest time, it was an industry-only show. So only video game press, people who are reporting on video games, industry professionals, could attend the show. And it was kind of a working conference. You would show up, you would go to press conferences, and then you'd write about those things in your video game magazine that you ran. Remember those? So now, of course, it's morphed and the internet exists, and it's become this thing that gamers follow a bit more closely, I think, than they did back in 1995, simply because we have the ability to very quickly see the news as it updates. And then because of that, it kind of feels like it's become increasingly crowded. Like the concept of E3 has just become very, very crowded. And really, it's a weird concept when you break it down. It's we have this entire calendar year, but instead we're gonna pick a handful of days out of the year for every single video game developer and publisher and console manufacturer to come together and announce everything all at once. E3 is kind of like video game Christmas land, because you get all these massive announcements all at the same time. But if you're one of those announcements that isn't like the biggest, hugest announcement that year, it's probably getting just lost by the wayside. Video game blogs and websites and stuff put up so many stories that all these little games just end up getting kind of trampled over in favor of like the big, huge announcements, like a new console or what have you. So from a business standpoint, it does kind of make a lot of sense to get away from that conference, start doing your own thing at a different time, and kind of carve out your own space. It's the same thing you see with game releases, where if a big game like, for example, Red Dead Redemption 2 is coming out, other game companies will try to move their video game releases away from that as much as possible, and give the big game room to breathe, and give consumers a chance to kind of catch their breath from that huge game that came out, finish playing it before, hey, look, you might want to play our game now that it's coming out. That doesn't always work, and you do end up with, of course, big games coming out at the same time. But I think the principle definitely applies to conferences as well. And we've definitely seen in years past lots of shifting happening with what E3 is. So I mentioned originally that it was an industry professional conference, and they have now, very recently in 2017, opened up E3 to the public. So E3, you can actually go and visit the show now. You do not have to be an industry professional. You don't have to be reporting on video games. You just have to pay the pretty expensive price for a ticket, and you can show up. And it's gone through some growing pains with the 2 years of being open to the public. And it's kind of turning into sort of a PAX. It's turning into a fan-central conference instead of a business-central conference. And along with that, the companies that are attending E3 are changing and are mixing up how they interface with E3. Nintendo, for all it's worth, is kind of heading off this charge. They realized that speaking to E3 goers is not necessarily their main base. It's not what they need to be doing. So they haven't hosted a normal E3 press conference for many years, since like 2013. They go do their own thing, they have their treehouse, they host their own stream, and they might be doing things around E3, but it's not for E3. They're not officially kind of having a presence there and doing a press conference. And now the news here today is that Sony and PlayStation is not going to be there at all. And there's, of course, was talk of like, okay, well, you're not going to do, main like show floor stuff. Are you going to have a press conference still? Like, no. Like, okay. Calm down, PlayStation. Are you going to do a press conference just off-site? Are you going to run your own show like Nintendo does? And the answer is no, that they're not doing any programming around E3. So they are literally getting away from E3 entirely for 2019. And we don't know if that means they are going to do their own conference at a different time in 2019, if they're going to start messaging directly. Of course, that is the big trend, is everyone kind of pulling away from E3 and getting to control their own message a bit more. That's really kind of the general flow of information about video games across the board. So back in the day, we talked about magazines. A game publisher would come to a reporter, they'd get the whole story, that reporter would write it up, and it would get delivered in a magazine. So you would be reading EGM, for example, and you'd read all about the new Mario game that's coming out, and you would read this kind of filtered version coming from the developer through the magazine to you. And game publishers at some point realized that now that we have the internet, they can talk directly to you. They can skip the entire process of going to the magazine, going to the website first, and that's what you see companies like Nintendo starting to do. They're just going to host their own stream. They're just going to host their own mini little conference and talk directly to you, so that way they get to control the message, because that's what it all comes down to, controlling the message, controlling the marketing. And you can't really blame them for that, which is why you see video game websites morphing to kind of what they are now. You have your blogs that just regurgitate the news, or you have sites that have expanded out into more personality-focused things, or they do Let's Plays and things like that, right? You have to carve out your own little niche for what you mean now when you don't just dictate the content that comes from video game publishers. So all of this changing, kind of the huge overarching, like, video games are changing and messaging around games are changing, it really makes me wonder, does E3 continue? We already have conferences that are directed at fans. They're built around being a fan experience and getting to play these games and interact with other fans and come together as a community. Things like PAX are a perfect example of that. PAX is growing and always expanding, and there's a PAX everywhere now. I don't know that E3 can necessarily come in this late to the game and recreate themselves in a way that's going to be successful enough if they lose that kind of mystique of being the place where things get announced, where things happen. More and more things are getting announced at places like PAX now. So if E3 is just another one of those, I don't know why you don't just go to those. So it'll be very interesting to see if, Nintendo's not going to be there in an official capacity for E3 2019, most likely, because that's been their MO so far. Sony's pulling out entirely and not doing any programming around E3 2019. It'll be very interesting to see what Microsoft does and what the other third-party publishers do. If they all decide to follow suit, decide that Sony has started this train and they're going to pull out as well, I think E3 kind of just starts to die on the vine. I really don't know what it looks like at that point. So we could very rapidly be seeing the death of E3. And as a fan of video games and as someone who looks forward to that every single year, and it's just, 3 days of a super excitement, that makes me kind of sad. But at the same time, those games are still going to come out. I'm still going to get all that news. It just might trickle out a little slower throughout the year, instead of being just a fire hose of information that comes at me all at once. But it's certainly a thing to think about. E3 as a whole, the ESA who runs E3, says that E3 2019 is going to feature an expanded emphasis on featuring never-before-seen content and providing immersive new experience for attendees. And they also want to focus on, quote, burgeoning video game sectors such as esports and indie games. So obviously, they understand this is a thing. And marketing speak, that's them saying, we have to figure out what the heck we're going to do when E3 is no longer E3. So that's going to do it for Pretty Dece for today. Thanks very much for joining me to pontificate about the future of the Electronics Entertainment Expo. Something that matters a lot to me and something that I'm very curious about and kind of seeing how it morphs and what changes. If you want to support Pretty Dece, you can do so. Visit prettydeceshow.com/listener support to find out those details. You can also listen to the show wherever you download your podcasts. Maybe that's iOS, maybe that's Google, maybe that's Spotify. We're everywhere. Even the apps you haven't heard of, trust me. You can also watch the video version of this show and see the pretty pictures that go along with it. Find that on YouTube, youtube.com/prettydece to go straight to the channel. And of course, follow me on social media. I love chatting it up with you guys. Find me on Facebook, find me on Twitter, find me on Instagram at Pretty Dece Show.